Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 343rd episode, 343. Nice little palindrome for you on the podcast today. Today, we are talking about fly fishing for panfish, bluegill, sunfish, rock bass, pumpkin seed. Go on down that list. Catch them all. They are all wonderful. And one of the reasons I'm thinking about this is, well, I'm actually packing for a trout trip right now, but I am excited because in about 1 month, I'm going to be fishing on private water that is loaded with panfish. Now, that might not seem like the kind of thing that gets you really excited, especially when there are large trout and saltwater fish and other things to be had, but knowing that I'm going to be fishing a river that is loaded with rock bass and with bluegill and sunfish down in Virginia that flows through private property has me really excited because these are going to be large and probably aggressive fish. The only other times I've fished there, I've had a ton of success, and not only will I be fishing there, but my kids will be fishing there as well. And so, yes, I'm excited about trout fishing in the next couple of weeks, but I'm also very much looking forward to getting down onto this little warm water creek. Now, when it comes to fishing for panfish, there's a lot of skills, there's a lot of tactics, there's a lot of techniques that are going to put you in business to catch more and bigger panfish. And if you look back in the archives of Casting Across, there's both articles and podcasts that talk about these particular topics. There are podcasts talking about how to find bigger panfish, the flies to use, where to fish, where not to fish. In fact, you can be in the wrong place and be catching so many smaller and medium-sized panfish that you're missing out on the larger panfish. And so there's an article that talks about that. There's also an article that I would highly recommend, and I think a podcast that is a companion piece that discusses how you have skills that are already in your repertoire from trout fishing that you can easily translate into panfish fishing. And then as you hone those on your pond or on your creek, you can then turn around and become a better trout angler. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then definitely throw panfish in the search bar over at Casting Across or Casting Across Panfish in your podcast player, and you'll find those older episodes. But today I want to talk about gear, and I want to use that not simply as an opportunity to talk about equipment, although I like it, and if analytics bear any validity, then you like it as well. But I want to use them as an opportunity to talk about why I like using the equipment I like using for panfish. Now, here's the disclaimer. You can catch all the panfish in the world on trout gear. And in fact, that's probably what you're going to be using more often than not. You're not going to necessarily go buy a bunch of equipment that is panfish specific. You are going to be using specific trout gear that has a size or a function that lends itself to the kind of fishing that is going to increase your enjoyment of fishing for panfish. But that said, if you have the 8.5 foot 5 weight with a medium fast action and a weight forward line and monofilament leader and tippet, you're going to do just fine. The only thing that you'll need to do is potentially get some flies. But the reality is, as we'll talk about here in a moment, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to catch as many panfish as you want to simply by using trout flies. That big, puffy stimulator dry fly is going to catch you some fish on the top. That, like Copper John, is going to catch you fish under the surface. And that small woolly bugger is going to catch you a lot of fish that as you strip it in. However, there are some things you can do to maybe make it a little bit better, a little bit easier. And what that means ultimately is a little bit more enjoyable. And if you find yourself fly fishing for panfish a lot, you have that pond in the neighborhood, you have that creek that flows through some private property that you happen to have access to, then you might consider saying, well, this is the rod that I have a trout use for, but this is the one I'm going to choose to go and fish for panfish. Or if you simply choose, and this is totally fine. I know a lot of people get all bent out of shape when people buy things that they want to buy for some reason. Go out and buy equipment that is specifically geared towards fly fishing for panfish. And this is your designated panfish setup. And so that's kind of the approach that I'm taking today. So again, don't see this as something dogmatic. If I say, hey, a 8 foot 4 weight, Don't go out and buy an 8-foot 4-weight for panfish if you already have an 8-foot 4-weight for trout, or if you have an 8.5-foot 4-weight, or if you have an 8.5-foot 5-weight. It'll work just fine. However, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of like the dream setup in my opinion. So we'll start with the rod, and I'll explain why that is. Now, again, I've mentioned this so many times before. I like fishing fiberglass. I think is a lot of fun, and I really enjoy fishing fiberglass for panfish when I'm kind of taking it easy and when I'm just out there having fun. Now, that's not to say that fly fishing for panfish with any sort of intensity is not fun, but when I really want to make precise casts and when I really want to turn over larger flies, and when I'm fishing in a situation where I might be backed up to vegetation, so I'm fishing from the bank, either on a pond or on a creek, I want that graphite rod that's going to have a little bit more power in the butt section and a little bit more snap in the tip. So again, I am totally cool with fishing my fiberglass rods. I have a 4-weight that I love to fish for panfish and trout, and I have a 6-weight that I love to fish for panfish and trout, among other fiberglass rods. But my preferred material is graphite. And there's a number of reasons for that. Like I said before, you're going to, generally speaking, although they have some much more progressive action fiberglass rods today, and bamboo for that matter, a graphite rod is going to be much more accessible for something that's going to have that butt section that can turn over a popper. Even a small popper, although it's not heavy, although it's not large, it has enough wind resistance when you are casting it, or a weighted streamer, or even a waterlogged streamer that has a lot of material that's going to take on some water. It is a little bit easier to cast at distance and at accuracy, both being important things to think about when you are using a rod with a little bit more backbone and down from the mid to the butt section, and then maybe even a little bit of a snappier tip. I also like to have that tip that isn't super, super soft like you often find in slower graphite rods and in fiberglass rods, because if I do have a longer cast out there, which again is necessary sometimes, I want that hook set to be nice and responsive. I would rather throttle my hook set than have to force it because the tip is soft. So what I mean by that is I would rather be the one in control of how much pull, how much force I am putting on the line and the leader, because I know the tip section of my rod and I can back off a little bit if I am, fishing to more delicate fish that are rising in a little bit more of a delicate fashion than if I am maybe fishing a streamer where I can really have that sensitivity and then pop it nice and hard to get a good hook set, especially if I have a larger fish like a bass that does take that fly. So again, like I say, fish with what you want to fish, but in my mind, a graphite rod with that medium fast action is going to give you the best sort of casting and hooking options that you can have when you are fishing for panfish. Especially because sometimes you have to be relatively quick on some of those hook sets, especially when fish are being territorial and not necessarily in feeding behavior. That's when you have a big bull bluegill and they are biting because they're angry, not necessarily because they're hungry. You want to be able to respond very, very quickly, and having that quicker tip is going to give you that benefit. But getting back to the idea of casting, there's times where your cast needs to be very, very accurate. And this gets back to the idea I was talking about earlier of fishing for larger bluegill. There's times where you aren't going to be able to get your fly to the fish that you are targeting because there are so many smaller fish that are around. Generally speaking, the watersheds that have large fish also have healthy populations, and that means a lot of the 4 and 6 inch fish that you probably want to avoid, bare minimum, because they're just going to, if not get your fly hooked, they're going to get it waterlogged. So to be able to cast into that spot and target that precise place that you want to put that fly, if you are targeting larger fish, it is beneficial to have a rod that's going to give you the kind of casting accuracy that you want to have, that you need if you do want to target the larger fish, which oftentimes entails casting a larger fly, whether it be a surface fly or a streamer. So that would be my material suggestion and my action suggestion: graphite, medium fast, and then I would go with something in between 8 and 9 feet, and that really depends on where you are fishing. I like to have a little bit more length when it comes to having the ability to mend or guide a streamer. And what I mean by that is I'm fishing weeds, and I'm fishing either weed beds or lily pads. I like to have the length so I can kind of move my line along as I strip that fly in. As I mentioned last week in an episode about stripping, I don't like to use my rod tip to strip flies in, but I do like to position my rod tip to allow my stripping to guide that fly precisely where I want to. And with warm water fishing in general, and fishing for panfish in particular, I want to be able to put that popper, put that slider, put that gurgler in the precise spot I want it to go in. Or even if I'm stripping in like a foam beetle or an ant, I want it to go right where I want it to go, because when fish are being, again, when they're feeding, they're being finicky, or they're feeding out of, not necessarily feeding, but when they're biting out of an anger response, you almost have to put them in the right spot. And so to be able to guide that line and then that strip right where you want it to go, it's nice to have that longer rod. So I have no problem fishing a 9-foot long rod. That said, there's times where you're on smaller water, where you may need to have a little bit more control of your back cast, or going down to that 7-foot 9-inch or that 8-foot is a really good call. So I would say if I were to have an all-around length, I would say something like 8.5 feet is almost perfect. If you're out on a canoe or a kayak, then I think longer is better. But again, if you want to stick with an all-around length, 8.5 is a really good length. So graphite, medium fast, 8.5 foot. Now, what weight should you fish? A lot of folks do kind of what they do with small stream trout, and they say, well, I'm going to try to get away with fishing that one weight because I want to feel that fish bend that rod. And if you tangle with larger bluegill, you know that a 5 weight is still going to bend over really, really well for a nice size fish. And this is, again, where I want to kind of bring up the whole concept of, you can kind of just go out and goof around and catch a bunch of fish on that little tiny fiberglass 1 weight. And I do that. And I have a little fiberglass 1 weight. And it's a lot of fun to catch bluegill of any size on it. But I am limited in the kinds of flies I can cast and in the distance I can cast them. With an 8.5 foot rod, you can fish that 4 weight or that 5 weight both really, really well. Again, 3 weight's going to be fine. 6 weight's not going to necessarily be overkill, especially if it's a high quality, well put together rod. But my preference would be a 4 or a 5 weight. And I would say I would err on the side of going lighter, because you can oftentimes, with a nice rod, with a 4 weight, you can make all the casts that you need with that little panfish popper. Now, you might ask me again after a week from now, after I've been fishing for those fish for a while, or next month when I'm down there fishing for bluegill pretty hard, I might change my mind and say, no, I'd rather up it to a 5 weight. But right now, I'll say 4. I'd say 4.5 if I could get away with that. But again, that is going to give you a much better control of your cast using a rod that matches that line better than you would with like a 3 weight. And as far as the type of line, I think weight forward is best. Now, here's another reason why you might want to err towards the heavier side if you are buying a combo that is going to be panfish specific. A lot of times you are not going to find those really aggressive heads on fly lines until you get to 6 weight. Some companies make 5 weights when it comes to like warm water fly line, like your bass specific fly line. And what is the benefit of a line like this? Well, a line like this is going to turn over those air and wind resistant and waterlogged flies a little bit better, because it's going to have that more aggressive weighted head. So that is to say, you look at the profile of that line, and there's going to be a much more aggressive, thicker PVC coating on that fly line in that immediate 10 to 20 feet of line, whereas the trout line, it might be spread out to like 30 feet. Now, that's an overgeneralization, and different manufacturers do different things, but it is kind of hard to find a warm water specific taper when it comes to like your 2 and 3 and 4 weights. That said, if you are really sold out on fishing those really lightweight lines, then there's a lot of small stream tapers that are built in a similar way. Now, they are marketed for small stream trout fishing, but they're going to effectively give you that same function, and they are able to roll over casts with only a little bit of line out. So once you start casting them, then you have that entire head that is out of the tip of the line. So those would be the two kind of line suggestions, as we're still talking about rods to a certain degree. I would look at, if you want to go to that 5 and 6, getting a warm water taper, and if you're wanting to go to like that 4 and lower, then look at the small stream trout tapers that are designed to cast when you only have 10 or 15 feet of line. I'm not talking about tippet and leader, but line out of the end of your rod, because then when you actually go to make a cast that's like 30 feet long, you have that whole head out, and it will give you some extra oomph when you're trying to cast and ultimately roll over a larger fly, as that energy goes from that fly line down into that leader. So kind of going backwards, just to sum up the rod, 8.5 foot graphite 4-weight with a medium fast action is a really, really nice rod. But again, you could twist my arm ever so slightly and I would say 5-weight. So I mentioned line already and kind of talked about the theory of what I'd like to use. But again, any sort of weight forward is going to do great. I like something with a more aggressive head, and you are going to find more of those that are designed for trout, especially in the 4-weight and the 5-weight, than you are for warm water species. Once you get into the 6 weights and higher, then you're going to find some that will work really well. And again, I have no problem fishing a 6-weight for panfish, but I've already told you what I think the best one is, so let's stick with that. Now, as far as a reel goes, anything you want. I am all about using a well-made, durable click pawl reel. If it's got a disc drag, that's great. I like to think of anything that is well made, that's going to last a long time, that's going to take some abuse, is better than something that's really, really flashy, that has bells and whistles, especially if you're going to be using it primarily for fishing for panfish. You're going to be doing a lot of reeling, you're going to be doing a lot of stripping, and it's going to get put in the water probably, and more silt and more mud that you're going to encounter when you are fishing for trout. So just a nice machined reel, whatever you can find that is going to hold that line in nice big loops. A big, large arbor is nice so that line doesn't have any coils and memory. Then that's all you need. Now, leader and tippet. We could talk a long time about leader and tippet theory, but what I like to fish when I fish for panfish, regardless if I'm fishing dries or streamers or nymphs, I like to have a butt section that I start with like a 3x 7.5 foot knotless tapered leader. So I buy that pre-packaged leader and I snip it down to where it gets to about the like 1x portion. So I'm left with like this 4x relatively stiff butt section, and then I build my leader from there. So I have like a 4-foot knotless tapered leader going from a butt section with the loop-to-loop connection to my fly line, and it goes down to about a 1x, and then I like to run just whatever length of tippet that I need for the conditions. So if it is 4 more feet or of 1x, then it's great. If it's 4 feet of 2x, that's fine. And I'm actually cool with going from 1x right to 3x. And 3x is about as light as I like to fish, especially if I'm fishing streamers or poppers. Dry flies might be different, but when I'm fishing something like a popper or a gurgler or a some other sort of surface bug, then I'll fish it down to a 3x. And so I'll go from that 1x, that 4 feet of that knotless tapered section that tapers down to a 1x. Then I'll add another 4 feet of whatever tippet material diameter I think is best for the conditions. If I'm fishing streamers, I'll do straight 1x from there. And if I'm fishing a more subtle dry fly, then I might go down to 3x. But usually 1x or 2x accomplishes so much of the needs that you have for fishing for these panfish. Just think about the fact that a lot of times folks who catch a lot of panfish, like thinking about kids fishing from docks, they're fishing like 8-pound test and they're doing just fine. So it's more about what is going to give you a better turnover of your fly on your cast than it is about strength. And again, I like mono more than fluorocarbon for this, and I just make sure that I tie good knots, and I like to use the same brand of tippet. So when I do go to make changes, I have a nice consistency and from one X rating to the next X rating. That might just be a little too persnickety, but honestly, I think that is a good thing for me, so I can pay attention to, where I'm at in my leader if I have to make modifications. If I'm feeling like that dry fly is not turning over well enough, I can look down and say, okay, maybe I need to add in a smaller middle section of like 1x before I swing down to a larger stretch of 3x, so I can really get that dry fly to turn over. All right, I've talked almost 20 minutes and I haven't talked about flies. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a part 2, and that's going to be next week. So this is part 1 of Panfish gear, serious panfish fishing gear. And next week, we'll talk about flies, and we'll talk about some other things that you can add to your arsenal. Some are very inexpensive, and something else I'm going to add is going to be probably the most expensive piece of fly fishing gear you will own. And you can use it for a lot more things than just panfish, but it will really help your panfish fishing out. So is there something that I missed when talking about rod, reel, line, leader, and tippet? Let me know. Do you want clarification on leader specs? I'd be happy to go into greater detail. Do let me know. But next week, we will zip back around. We will talk about flies, and we will talk about some other accessories that I think will really help your panfish fishing this summer. And if you're not fishing for panfish, go ahead and do it. It is one of the most enjoyable things that one can do this time of year. This week on castingacross.com, Monday's article is called Dark Skies Fly Fishing Summer 25. So Dark Skies Fly Fishing is a relatively regional fly fishing publication. It's a magazine. It's primarily digital, but it's also available in print, and it focuses on the Mid-Atlantic region. And so the majority of the articles are going to be about Pennsylvania, with, of course, like Virginia and Maryland, Ohio, New York, New Jersey kind of thrown in there. And I have been tasked with writing some articles about New England. So this month, the summer 25 issue, there is an article about fly fishing Boston. A real kind of high level overview of if you find yourself up in the Bay State and you find yourself maybe here for a family vacation or for work, how could you maybe redeem a couple hours and try to go catch a striper or go catch a trout on some historic water? So that is my article this week. There's a lot more that is there in this episode or this issue. So I would definitely say go check that out. You can, again, go to the Casting Cross. You can click on Dark Skies Fly Fishing Summer 25, and there will be a link there. But of course, Dark Skies Fly Fishing is a website you can go and get that whole magazine and read through it yourself. Wednesday's article is a link to a new video, the 2 fly fishing books you've seen everywhere. So one of the things that I've found with folks, and this is in everything, not just in fly fishing, if something is ubiquitous, you see it all over the place, people will say, it's just so normal, so common, so regular, that they almost lose interest. Well, when it comes to the 2 books that I talk about on today's video, or this week's video, I don't think that's the case. I think they're actually really good and worth checking out. And I say that having been in a position where I didn't think they were anything special and then actually reading them, which is good to not judge a book by its cover, and liking them. So check out that article or just go over to YouTube and watch that video. This week's recommendation on Casting Across is Panfish on the Fly. So I've been talking about panfish on the fly today. Panfish on the Fly is the authority, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Bart Lombardo, on fishing for panfish, both how it has been done, what is happening, and what is next. Equipment, fly patterns, that's really where the magic happens. Species, all that stuff. And he is the purveyor of a piece of equipment that will help you tie one of the finest and simplest surface flies that you have ever seen. I'm a huge fan. He sent me one of his earliest models of the little tool to make this guy. I don't want to spoil the triangle bug for you, so I will just say, go to Panfish on the Fly, check out his website, check out the triangle bug, what it is, watch Bart tie one, and then buy the equipment to make them yourself. If you fish for panfish, if you have kids who you want to get a fly tying, get this. They will tie up these flies, and they will be so happy because they will be catching fish, and they won't be hooking them deep. And so you definitely go over to Panfish on the Fly. I'll put a link in this podcast show notes where you can get so much information. And I'd say even compare and contrast what I've said about panfish equipment with what Bart says. And, definitely give him the benefit of the doubt if we disagree. But I think Bart's a great guy, and he does great work celebrating a fantastic fish. So definitely check that out. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast in Spotify and in Apple Podcasts. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.